Welcome back to the big issue on City TV and also on City 97.3 FM. My name is Godfred Akoto-Boafo, discussing matters of the economy, particularly with labor and teachers who have been on a 5-day strike. Well, it has lasted 5 days so far. They are still negotiating with government. The government has called on them to back down. They are adamant in their position, but negotiations are ongoing. I think they'll continue their conversation on Tuesday, according to a press release that we had just yesterday from the Ministry of Employment and Labour. But you can share your thoughts on the conversation. 0549 986 996, 0549 986 996, and 0550 585832, 0550 585832. I would like to hear about how this strike is affecting your ward. If you have children in school, if you're a teacher, this conversation about cost of living allowance and the need to be paid properly for the services that are being rendered, and also your thoughts on the government's position that, well, we don't have any money at the moment, so be a bit more understanding of our situation. For those of you who are tweeting at us as well, at City973 and at Godfred Akoto-Boafo, using the hashtag The Big Issue, I will get to your comments, suggestions, questions. We're also streaming live on Facebook, City TV GH and City973. You can also leave your comments in the comments section. And if you do miss out, you can always catch playback on our YouTube channel, CityTube, CITITUBE. Subscribe when you are there, and we'll get to you. So we've heard from Franklin, Mr. Carbonu, Kofi Asare as well. Let's hear about the economic side of this. And so I have Dr. Patrick Esuming from the University of Ghana as well. I passed by your office the other day. It was empty. But you were busy, don't worry. I knew you were busy. But in looking at all this, the question I will ask you is simple. Can the government or can the economy bear this extra demand that is being made by, well, for now, teachers, but from next week, large sections of labor?
Okay. Again, good morning to viewers. So I think when you ask whether the economy can bear it, I mean, in our current position, you probably say no. But I think we have to, take the discussion from several different angles. Okay. One is that if you look at, so first of all, where is the 20% coming from? From the end of from 2021, January 2021, till the last time the inflation number was read for May, the average cost of living based on the CPI basket has gone up about 32.3%. Within that period, the cumulative increase in salary for a public sector worker has gone up about 11.2%. So what that means is that there's been an erosion of the real wages of the average public sector worker. So I think even if a 20% was given, it is not going to increase their real income. It's all that it will do is that it's just going to make sure that erosion is dealt with. So let's start from there. But I think the other side of the discussion that hasn't really also received a lot of attention is the fact that, the workload. So I was glad that Mr. Kofi Asare brought up the issue about the workload. In the period where real wages appear to be going down, the productivity that is being extracted from some sectors or some groups of public sector workers have gone up. So he spoke about what has happened from the side of the lower level, the pre-university level. But if you look at the university level, for instance, since the COVID, we teach literally every year. So from the start of January, we've been teaching. And the number of students that we have to teach and that we have to examine have gone up. So it means that the productivity coming out of us has gone up. So as an economist, we always think that the pay is based on the productivity. So from that point of view, if you are demanding more productivity from me, and I'm giving up more, then there's clearly a justification for me to expect to be paid more. But I think I also like the point that Franklin made about making this a broader discussion about public sector pay.
Okay.
because it wasn't long ago when we were discussing the inequities between what people who are on single spine get and what people who are on Article 71 are getting. Because you see that even though the cost of living is rising for everybody, there are people who probably don't buy fuel, which will be eating, which has seen a significant growth in this period. And there are people who have different sort of cushions, all within the pub, even though we are all paid by the same paymaster. So I think that discussion, maybe it's time for us to widen the discussion, not just to say give us COLA, but also think about the general reform in how public sector workers are paid. And then bring in more the issue about the productivity. So I think we were just mentioning that this is something that, the last time the government association spoke, where Angel was not very happy.
Clockside wasn't happy either.
I think really for me, what I took from that was that we have to have that discussion, about a general, public sector pay in relation to productivity.
Is it to be considered a possible solution in having that conversation?
I think now, so that is one part of the solution. I think the existence of the wide inequities is a problem, because if all of us are facing a relatively expensive economy, cost of living is going up for everybody, and some people appears to be untouched. Meanwhile, we are all paid by the same paymaster. Then you expect that people will definitely be agitating, even though that part hasn't come out yet. So there's that part. But I think in terms of what we do with the economy, I think we shouldn't just limit it to COLA. The reason why there's COLA is because, or there's a demand for COLA, is because the way the economy is being run and the way things are going, cost of living is going up. So we have to also demand that action is taken on the root cause of why we are asking for the COLA, and that is the management of the economy and some of the decisions that have been made. So, he mentioned, how NAGRAT was opposed to the free SHS. There are several other decisions that have been made in the last few years that have contributed to the challenges that the economy have. So beyond saying that we should be giving COLA, I think there should be a little bit more demand, and a little bit more demand for accountability or better overall management of the economy. So that, don't forget, in 2021, public sector pay was going up only 4%. But because the living conditions were not as we have today, we didn't see this much agitation.
Yeah.
So if the economy is managed in such a way that the current challenges we are seeing have been minimized, then perhaps there will be more peace on the labor front.
Entirely true. If you talk that some of the interventions that were made, my favorite pet subject, Kelny GVG. There's not been a single independent audit of those $1.5 million we've been paying every month
to the company.
In an austere situation, we should have an accountable an account of exactly how these funds that we are spending are doing. We threw perfectly working systems, biometric systems, and spent close to $70 million buying new ones to organize an election. We spent so much money, right? One village, one dam, one district, one factory. All these, that ministry, it doesn't even exist again, it's been collapsed.
Yes.
We need an account of exactly how that ministry performed and used our money. We could have saved a lot of money to undertake some of these, to cushion some of these challenges as well.
But let me just read something quickly that has come through before Dr. Asuming continues. So this is coming from the National Council of Parent Teacher Associations. And do you know them?
Yes.
Oh, okay. And this is from Government Assisted Schools PTA, just to be specific. And it says that press release, treat resolution of teacher unions industrial action as an emergency. I'm reading, says the National Council of Parent-Teacher Associations has noted that the 4 teacher union strike embarked upon following government's inability to meet their demand for cost of living allowance is obviously going to be a protracted process if leadership is not shown by all stakeholders. In fact, parents across the country have remotely observed with concern the likely effects of the inconclusive anti-government teacher union meetings on 5th and 8th July. Parents in this circumstance feel gravely disturbed as the strike has already triggered the following effects on our children. 1. Contact hours for learning have started reducing generally. 2. Final year students of public junior high schools and senior high schools may not complete their syllabi before their respective WAEC examinations. The finalist situation could worsen since their batch was severely affected by COVID-19 restrictions. 3. Some of the little ones have begun hurting themselves at school since there are no teachers to guide and protect them. 4. Due to the prevention of union members from providing food, feeding in the boarding schools has become a huge challenge, if not in crisis. Indeed, while parents are not naive of the prevailing economic conditions in our country, it is also the plain truth that the cost of living is high for workers generally. It is therefore clear in this regard that the teacher union's demand is legitimate and within their rights. However, parents are appealing to our noble teachers to consider their students' plight, especially the final year students, in the nation's economic situation and meet government halfway for a speedy resolution of the matter. We know of the difficulty on the part of government, but there is always a middle way out of such situations, and therefore we urge government to treat the resolution of the union's demand and subsequent strike as an emergency situation. Government must, as a matter of fact, leave no stone unturned to exploit the middle path out in order to deal expeditiously with the matter for industrial peace and harmony to return. The NCPTAs believe government has the capacity and capability to resolve it and must show leadership now. Following the above stated immediate effects and future remote ones on our students' academic performance, there is the need to speed up negotiations for acceptable outcome. In view of the above mentioned effects, particularly the safety of the little ones and the food crisis, we are appealing to the protagonists not to drag issues for the sake of Mother Ghana. In conclusion, parents are appealing to the Ghana Education Service to consider officially closing down schools for these very young ones, if not all schools, should the strike be prolonged. Signed by Christian Akins Achu, Acting National President. So this is just information that has come through. I will add that to the second part of this conversation, but I just wanted to bring this to. So, Dr. Suming, please continue.
Yes. So I think the other side of the conversation that I was going to come to is, I mean, what the implications will be for government finances. I think we all know that situation that government finances is currently in. Mm-hmm. Now, but in a sense, I think it's good that we are also now starting the IMF discussion. Mm-hmm. Because we don't want to finish the discussion and suddenly there's a demand by organized labor. And then suddenly it becomes a tug of war. So I think even though it would have been better if at the outset there had been more engagement by government when the agitation started. Mm-hmm. But now, be it as it may, we are here. So I think it would be good that whatever government is able to offer, or whatever, the outcome of these discussions, so that it will feed into what we can do or what we cannot do within the IMF program. So we don't have other, after the discussion and after we have come up with a program, then the issue of this agitation comes again. But ultimately, what I want to conclude on this is that if the underlying causes of why there's a demand for cola is not resolved, mm-hmm. then we may have a situation where we're going to have a perpetual demand for cola. Okay. So for me, I think that's the big issue. The big issue is that we have to solve the problems of the economy that has brought us here.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you very much, Dr.
Which includes declaring all the numbers, because it's a very important point he makes.
Yes.
And it's good that the government would now say that, okay, well, listen, I hear you, but there's an IMF program now, which is a very, very positively convenient route to take right now. And I think on the part of government, this time around, I'm sure they'll come out with all the proper numbers so that groups like NJ Kabonus would understand what the current situation looks like and what they can realistically expect. But I still insist there must be a reconfiguration of the way some of these very important sectors are actually treated.
Now, let me come to a part of the conversation where I'll focus more on Angel and Kofi for a while, and then I'll come back to Dr. Assuming, because it's not just on the cola side. This week we've had reports of, and we've had these reports all year. It's been going for some time. I think I've even brought you in studio to discuss this before. But it does not seem to end. And there also doesn't seem to be a general acceptance by the Ministry of Education, Ghana Education Service, that there is actually a food situation in the schools. The Daily Graphic did a very extensive job yesterday, went to Cape Coast, and some of the schools that were mentioned, they're talking in Fansipim, they're talking St. Augustine's College, Ghana National, they went to the Volta region, some of the schools said they won't comment for obvious reasons. They went to the ministry, and the person who runs the unit says, well, I have not heard, but I'll check and see if I can get a list. Yesterday, we heard from the one region, for instance, Chas in the Upper West region, for instance. Now, they are saying that at a meeting of the Upper West Regional Chas on the 6th July 2022 at Queen of Peace Senior High School, the food and money situation in the schools was thoroughly discussed. It came out that the food suppliers contracted by the buffer stock company and those local suppliers contracted to help out are all refusing to supply due to non-payment of outstanding monies of outstanding monies owed for food supplied to the schools. This has led to serious food shortages in all the schools in the region. In fact, an assessment of the situation indicated that most schools cannot go beyond 1 week. 1 week, if nothing urgent is done about it. Also, the way that money is trickling into the schools is making it very difficult to run the schools. In view of these challenges, it was resolved that 1. All schools will feed students with only whatever is available in the school food stores, and students will be asked to bring their own sugar and other items to the dining hall. 2. If sufficient money and food is not received in the schools by Friday, 15 July 2022, will be compelled to tell parents and guardians to either feed their wards or come for them, since it will be impossible to continue feed them with nothing. 3. Candidates writing the WASI will be compelled to feed themselves or come from home to write the exams. 4. All sporting and cultural activities at the school, district, regional, and national levels are hereby suspended with immediate effect until further notice, since there is no money to carry out these activities. We also consider it a health hazard to compel students to partake in these activities on empty stomachs, fearing that they may collapse during the activities. 5. All workshops and other activities which involve the payment of money should be suspended, since it is becoming impossible for schools to pay for these activities. We count on you and your usual support. Thank you. Coming from the regional Chas chairman. This is coming from Chas Upper West. And to hold on from, let me start from Kofi. Kofi does a lot more monitoring on the ground on these matters. Kofi?
Yeah.
Why is it difficult for the Ministry of Education, Ghana Education Service, to admit that there is a problem when it comes to food supply? Because anytime it comes up, what they do is do photo op. They'll go and sit in some dining hall, look nice, drink the tea with the students. That day the food is prepared special. As soon as they leave, the children go back to eating whatever it is that they are being fed in those schools. Schools are afraid to talk about it. We are happy Chas Upper West has decided to come out. But there seems to be a fear to admit that this is a problem. But this has been going on for close to 6 to 7 months now.
Well, in terms of why the Ministry of Education and Engineers prefer to address the issue the way they've been addressing it, I think that's a question for the ministry and the engineers, because I also don't know why they choose to address it the way they do. But what I understand to be the cause of the problem is obviously a funding architecture issue. So the solutions sometimes we hear, are not far-reaching. You see, when a problem is being solved, you need to look at the root cause and not the symptoms. So if a school is in shortage of food and then you are able to re-engineer and get another school or get some contractor to supply food immediately within 24 hours. We call it emergency service or ambulance service approach in policy management. It's not sustainable. It doesn't affect the system. The problem is that, and I'm sorry that we are still not learning from the challenges we had with the introduction of the capitation grant as far back as 2005. Let me explain this. Between 2005 and now, 16 or 17 years, every education sector annual review conference that has been held within the basic education sector, the first challenge is always delay in the disbursement of capitation grants. It has been so since 2006. It was so last year. And you find that discussions always revolve around symptoms, addressing the symptoms. But the problem is the financial architecture, because if you want the capitation grant to be funded from the consolidated fund, and you know how it's disbursed, obviously you will never receive it at the beginning of the year unless you remodel the financial architecture. The same thing is what we have now in the free senior high school feeding, because the free senior high school budget is 70%, about 70% food. Okay, so if government is spending $2 billion a year, about 1.4 or so goes into food. Now, this amount is funded partly from the ABFA, that's oil revenue, which is supposed to be the most reliable source of funding for free senior high school, because the other one is free senior high school, GOG. Now, this year, for instance, ABFA is funding free senior high school to the tune of about 40%, which means majority of the free senior high school cash is coming from GOG. And that's where the problem is. Because it means that you will be able to get some expedient disbursement from ABFA, but you will struggle with the 60% that will come from GOG. Even last year, I need to indicate that even last year, the reliable ABFA is beginning to be unreliable, because by the time the minister went to Parliament last year to read the budget, more than half of the ABFA for the education sector had not been released, had not been disbursed. So the issue is about having an unreliable financing source, a financing source that will delay. Now, being cognizant of this, and also taking account of the rising inflation levels, suppliers are struggling. But once you are owing someone already, even without this rising inflation levels, we're having challenges with suppliers supplying on time, because Bufferstock was owing them. But now we've gotten to the point where, in addition to the delayed payment of suppliers, we are having increasing food inflation. As of last year, a 50 kg bag of maize was being bought by Bufferstock for 100 Ghana cedis. At that time, there was nowhere in Ghana you would find that 50 kg bag of rice being sold for 100 cedis in Ghana, even at Farmgate. So you see, the pricing approved by the PPA is so low, very, very low, that if you delay in paying suppliers, you are killing them. Much more within an inflationary period like this. So yes, there is food, but the suppliers, are having challenges supplying the food because they are being owed. But Bufferstock has also not received their money from the Ministry of Finance. So there's very little they can do. So you see, the challenge we are discussing is not an education problem. It is a financial problem. It is actually a Ministry of Finance problem, because they are not disbursing approved funds. Why? Because we have liquidity issues and we are not able to find the money. It is not only under free senior high school. If you go to Get Fund last year, Get Fund, out of about 1.2 billion that was allocated, about 1.2 billion that was allocated at the Get Fund, by the end of the year, less than 50% of Get Fund was disbursed. So it is a general issue, the economic conditions affecting the ability of the Ministry of Finance to disburse funds. That is why it's important for us to look at innovative ways of doing this. But anytime you talk about this, the politicians will not allow you to talk about it. The first thing is that we need to begin looking at, you see, what happens normally is that if schools were receiving something in advance, let's say if students were paying something, that money would have come in advance so that in view of the delays, those funds would have been used to cushion the system. So, but students are not allowed to pay anything because we want to run a wholesale free senior high school, the only one in the world, which is boarding, the only one in the world that I know about, where boarding is free, feeding is everything is free. If we still want to run it, then it means that we need to have a situation where we are going to empower buffer stock as a company to have the guarantees so that they can actually get an overdraft. Buffer stock is owed to the tune of about 400 million, depending on who you talk to. If they have an overdraft, they will be able to overdraw and then sort out some of their suppliers as they keep waiting for the delaying fund disbursement from the Ministry of Finance. But that will come with interest. But it's better for you to actually have an interest and have more interest or a very expensive payment regime than not to have food at all in our schools, because the latter will derail the academic calendar. But for this to happen, buffer stock needs some assets, because buffer stock is a young company. Their assets cannot raise 50 million Ghana cedis, for instance. So we need to have a discussion on the financing of buffer stock. That is what I think the discussion should be. Unless, of course, this government is ready to open up and appreciate what we all know, that if parents were supporting a bit, schools would have had some seed money to take care of feeding, even as suppliers delayed. But unfortunately, I'm not sure government is ready to back down on the wholesale free senior high school. Government still wants to feed everyone who goes to senior high school, and so we will have to look at the first option of trying to strengthen buffer stock, explore alternative means of raising liquid to take care of suppliers, our contractors, in the interim until the Ministry of Finance is able to disburse funding to them. Other than that, this is going to be another capitation grant delay where every year we will discuss it, but we will never solve it.
But Kofi, what about you want to place the blame at the doorstep of the finance ministry? Fine. But what about those who also say, look, for instance, you've had all student bodies come in and say, look, we are willing to come in and support with food just to help balance. And then government says no, and headmasters are afraid. If you show up, you are getting transferred, you are getting sent somewhere you don't want to. So the government is not open to assistance in these matters. And it's a finance matter, but the children's, if you look at COVID, you've seen some of the videos of the food the children are eating. It cannot be called food.
Yes, I understand. As for the food, I won't talk. As for the nature of the food, I won't talk about it, because immediately I talk about it, they will say I'm doing propaganda.
But you must talk about it.
I will talk about the issue, not the food itself.
Okay.
Not the food. The issue is that Charles is saying that I haven't seen the food they are eating. And even if I saw it, I know the next day a PR event will be arranged, and then they will say, not true. So I'll talk about the issue that Charles has raised. Yes, it is true that all students and other partners have the capacity to support. But you see, we have the policy framework to enable the participation and regulate same of all students is not available within both the basic education and the secondary education system. It has been collapsed because of free basic education and free senior high school. It is not available. So you find that at the basic level, PTAs are now very weak, close to non-existent. In fact, they are now PAs, parent associations. They've taken the teachers from there, because the issue was that the teachers were using their role in the PTAs to influence the adoption of school fees or push through school fees on the parents. That's what government thought. And so now it is PA, Parent Association. If you go to because government wants to guard against the introduction of fees. If you go to the secondary education level, it's even more stringent. There is no framework at all for the participation of all students. So headmasters are very careful. If you don't take care and you go and have an old student meeting and have a discussion with them and the levy is actually agreed that they are going to pay, it might be misconstrued as fees being packaged on old students and all that. So their role is strictly charity-based, and then voluntary. Even that, it is not structured well enough, within the context of accountability and all that. And so is the PTA system. I think that until we have a policy that appreciates that PTAs and all students have a role to play in financing the free senior high school program, either through infrastructural development support or through feeding. These two are the biggest elements of the free senior high school or our secondary education budget. Until we have that framework, it will be very, very difficult for us to structure and regulate and mobilize, if you like, at the broad policy level, the participation of PTAs and all students. It will happen in some schools that are very, very, very organized, all student association, that are very, very connected, and so on. But in majority of the schools, the schools you are seeing that are hungry, they are not the Achimotes and the Madisado. They are schools in Upper West, Upper East region, for instance, per the letter of trust. And you know what it means to mobilize their past students. Sometimes the old students, majority of them are farmers in the Zabzugu Tatale area who are even struggling to, survive. So there must be a broad framework, for mobilizing PTAs, and then old students. But for now, I think government policy does not favor that. Government is happy to continue funding free senior high school wholesale, 100%. And so let's just hope and pray that one day government will appreciate that the financing architecture of the program makes it difficult to make funds readily available for contractors to supply food without creating problems. And so let's see how we can explore other ways of making funds available upfront, including asking parents or some parents who have the means to do so to make some percentage contribution to food. But for now, it is free for all. And let's hope that government will find the money and then pay the contractors so that they can supply the food. As for food, there's food. It's about paying them.
Okay. Kofi, I thank you for that. I'll take final words on this from Angel. Angel, he says there is food, but it's a distribution and financial problem.
Yeah.
But mostly a financial problem.
Though Franklin...
All I see is chaos.
Franklin went to a seminary school in Lolobi. He's nowhere near being a prophet, but today he's looking like a prophet because I know the position of Franklin and Imani at the beginning, to the extent that there was even a compromised position. Then why don't you give coupons, if you recall? So that, for example, me, you, Dr. we are valued in coupons. Okay? So that, but no, the government was not listening to alternative advice. The issue was so politically charged that we want to prove to the people that our promise in giving them free SHS is being actualized or realized. And then they formed a central system called buffer stock. The history of this country tells you that when you centralize purchasing, distribution as the main conduit of providing items we need, it never sustains. One, the centralized body have the tendency of even inflating prices. And please, let somebody do a forensic audit of some of the items purchased in relation to the actual prices of those items at the time they were purchased. And then you begin to see something. Because most of these contractors were party apparatchiks, were affiliated to political parties. Number two, when there is a school in Ejura where there is maize, that school is having a comparative advantage to a school that is, let's say, in Fansipim along the coast, in terms of price of maize and the proximity of the farm gate to the school. So, in those days, prior to free senior high school, government sits with CHAS, parents, and they determine feeding cost per day. Sometimes it was outrageously low, But because of economies of scale, the school heads use their ingenuity and their relationship with suppliers to be able to keep the schools running. But in that case, there was availability of some resources to be able to manage the schools. And indeed, when they talk about this PTA thing, look, the PTAs have really helped the schools. So the reason why you see Wesley girls having more facilities than another school, I will mention,
no problem,
is because of the type of parentage you have in Wesley girls and their level of understanding how resources could aid their daughters in performing. So you have certain schools where before ICT even became
a
thing, they had provided ICT laboratories to those schools. In fact, there is a particular school, and you see, I won't mention names, where the PTA chairman was a former boss of Vodafone. And that school had one of the best ICT labs in this. Because the school was not even a grade A school. So look, there will definitely be certain parents who will say we won't pay. But there are parents who understood the value of contributing. And then when you take teachers out of PTA, the in locus parentis, those with the students on daily basis, are the teachers. So the parents will come in and be fed on the progress and development. So for example, when I tell you that the walls of a school is broken and that boys will be coming into the school to pry on the girls, as a teacher, I've seen the wall broken. An emergency PTA meeting is organized. For the protection of our children, can we contribute money for us to construct the perimeter wall to protect our children, to create a safe environment for teaching and learning to go on? This whole centralized mentality. And you see, I get difficulty in when a more conservative right-wing government attempts to implement an egalitarian economic and political policies. Sometimes I don't understand what is happening to the right. You are beginning to shift from your rightist philosophies to the left because it looks as if your survival politically is not sustainable with your right-wing philosophical ideas.
Angel, it may not even matter that much. Ideology doesn't feed people in this part of our world. I think what it feeds is pragmatism.
Right.
And if you did a proper, what you call means testing, which has been an age-old academic exercise, which could be done, you definitely can determine areas that are in need, from areas that do not require support. Same as the scholarship conversation you guys were having the last time.
Sure.
Right? So irrespective of the ideology,
there's you people are being blamed that it looks as if you have an agenda and every day you are on. You were on Bishop Herman. Bishop Herman used to be the school that people really struggle to go to. It used to, but you see, the headmaster does not even have money to even repair a broken window now. He will have to write through the district director before it gets to the top. And when monies are released, then he will get some money. The headmaster does not have the opportunity to mobilize parents and say, look, our children, the more you do that, you are charging parents for money. You may lose your position. You see how weird the situation is become. Just because we want to create the impression that we are running a perfect free senior high school policy. Now the food. For me.
You have 5 minutes.
Yes, for me, I'm a Catholic. So I speak the truth. Although tomorrow I can't go for communion. The food situation in the schools is very bad. And pictures have been taken by students. And I've sent those pictures to their parents.
Yesterday I saw a picture of a parent. A parent sent us pictures of his child preschool and when the child came home. And he was very upset by
Why don't we review this policy? And I'm saying that it's when we talk about review, review is not tantamount to cancel. We have said, let's review the policy. If I have been able to send my child to Christ the King cantonment, where the day fees is even more than the boarding fees in Wesley Girls, why can't I pay the school fees of my child in Wesley Girls? So I fall out of the bracket. But I recognize that there are also people who cannot pay. Can we target those people and give them state government bursaries? So you free up resources for the development of the educational agenda that we all have. Why are we not able to do that? Just because of political capital? We knew we were going to get to this. At the beginning, the economists were telling us that this thing is not sustainable. And truly, we've made profit out of Franklin and Co., who warned us at the beginning that this thing, it pleases the eye, but you cannot sustain this thing.
All right. Thank you very much, Angel. Let me just take a couple of messages and then we will move on to discuss IMF issues. This one says, good morning, City. I want to help answer your question of why we're asking government for cola, knowing times are hard everywhere. See, just 3 months ago, my hairdresser used to charge me 5 cedis for washing my hair. As I'm speaking, she currently charges 12 cedis. Why am I saying this? Didn't my hairdresser know times are hard? Where did she expect me to get that kind of money? It's obvious my hairdresser knows all this, but knowing well she can't survive on 5 cedis anymore because of the economic hardship, she has to increase the price of her services. And yes, I can't do anything but to continue patronizing her because that's the price now. So you see, the teacher also knows times are hard, but we also need to survive. Government must heed to our cola demand now. This is Jejom, a teacher from the Volta region.
But she can maintain an African hair.
Citizen Francis says almost all Ghanaians are dissatisfied with the situation in the country, but they are not all on strike because they understand that strikes alone don't solve problems. Teachers, please reconsider and stop the strike. This one says, why is it that for so long the social commentary for most parts, including that from very well respected journalists and many experts, suggest that even that the president from 1992 or even earlier is clean and that his appointees are not, when it is obvious that at least he tacitly endorses the wrongdoing, especially in the area of corruption? The nation is indeed infested with severely pretentious people. He's not very upset. He's very upset, sorry. This one says, if the country is broke, why is the president living extravagantly? Why has he refused to prudently advise? Why has he refused prudent advice from experts? This one from Delali in Hohoi. He's also talking about the president. And this one says, at a time when the nation is being told that there isn't enough revenue, the president has gone to sole source 35 million cedis contracts for billboards all over the country in the name of awareness creation for people to pay tax. Apart from these signages, they have also splashed millions on TV and radio adverts in different languages. The government should cut its size and reduce income. They have too many perks to their advantages. Leadership is a sacrificial job and not a beneficial one at that. Good morning, I'm Godfred. I'm not surprised teachers have declared strike. It's even long overdue. Things were not even this bad in previous times. This government has just been reckless and is being treated with kids' gloves. This is very upset Jones Adoboy sending us a message from La. You are watching The Big Issue on City TV and also listening to us on City 97.3. We'll take a quick break. When we return, Satekwe, former finance minister, joins us alongside Dr. Patrick Esuming and Franklin Kujo as we look at the start of engagements between the government of Ghana and the IMF. Welcome back to The Big Issue on City TV and also on City 97.3 FM. Going to the second part of the conversation now to discuss the start of engagements between the government of Ghana and the International Monetary Fund. As we know, a mission from the IMF arrived in the country on Tuesday, started engagements on Wednesday, and we've had multiple stakeholders from labor, academia, who have all been making inputs on what should be contained in Ghana's program. We've heard the position of the government as well. Is it a loan? Is it aid? All that. But we are trying to make sense of it in terms of what the real items possibly could be. So I'm happy to bring back the former finance minister, Mr. Tekwe. It's been a while since we've been on the big issue. Mr. Tekwe, good morning.
Yeah, good morning.
Thank you for making time. It's been almost a year since we last spent time on this program, but it's good to have you back. Dr. Patrick Esuming is with us, as is Franklin Kujo. And we'll also be joined by Dr. Theresa Mana Blankson. She's a fellow for the Center for Social Justice for Finance and Economy. Dr. Mana Blankson, good morning.
Good morning. Can you hear me well and good?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you very much for spending time with us. This morning is very early where you are, so thank you very much for the wake-up call. But I guess I will start the conversation from Dr. Mana Blankson, and then I'll come to Mr. Tekwe. This engagement, for most people, say will revolve around debt restructuring, debt sustainability. What is the potential points for Ghana, and what will the IMF, for instance, be looking at in this regard?
Thank you so much, and I want to thank you for having me on the program. Just to quickly, point out, I think in the case of the engagement with the IMF, everything is going to be on the table. So again, in terms of how the economy is doing, what is happening with inflation, what is happening with interest rates, everything that is happening with our debt, everything is going to be on the table. My sense is a number of things are going to be at the forefront. First, I think they are going to be discussing the issue of fiscal consolidation. It's one of the main things that is actually going to be on the table for this particular discussion. Again, because we talk about the issue of the fiscal deficit being a persistent problem, for which reason it would require a look at, to deal with fiscal consolidation in addition to ensuring there is sustained growth. The other things that we believe is going to be at the table also is our domestic revenue mobilization efforts. As we know, this has not kept pace with the rapid accumulation in the debt that we have seen. So again, it is going to be an issue that is going to be at the forefront in regards to this engagement with the fund. We believe that given the change in the structure of, our debt, the nature of our borrowing, we are now borrowing on non-concessional terms and at very high level of interest and the like. I think one of the important discussion will also be framed around the debt management strategy. We need a new debt management strategy, given the composition of the type of debt that we are actually incurring as a nation. Prior to us having, engagements with the Euro bonds and the like, we were having mostly non-concessional loans, but now that has changed. And so that is also one that is going to be at the forefront. And then, of course, addressing the issue with sound institutions and policy coordination issues, dealing with our macroeconomic fundamentals. These are all things that will be brought, into the discussion. I'm not certain what the position of the government is going to be. Again, because we are in the midst of a pandemic, one of the issues is, every country is experiencing problems, but we would need to acknowledge that the Ghanaian economy was actually cracking before the pandemic came in. Even though we were posting high levels of growth, one of the things is that the problem existed with the high rise in fiscal deficits and other developments that were going on. And there probably is going to be a need for the government to take a position that, yes, we do acknowledge that this is the issue. Again, that is up to them to make a choice. So, yes, these are some of the things that we consider is going to be at the forefront of the discussion.
In terms of strategies, I'm looking at a document that came from the CSJ that you belong to, and talks about short-term strategy. I think you've raised one point here: immediate fiscal consolidation efforts aimed at enhancing revenue mobilization and reducing expenditure. 2, engage creditors to initiate a process for debt reprofiling and restructuring. And 3, implement the rationalized convergence criteria in the ECOWAS region in preparation for the launch of the ECOWAS single currency. Explain that point for me.
All right. I think you've said so many points within
the third one. Explain the third one. The one on ECOWAS.
Which one? The ECOWAS.
Yes.
Okay. So I think you are pretty much familiar with Ghana actually trying to adopt the ECO together with the other other counterparts in the West African Monetary Union. And so again, this is one of the things. There are a number of policies that are being put in place that will ensure that every country is reaching a convergence, okay, bringing your fiscal deficit to a specific level, also ensuring that your debt to GDP is at a specific level, dealing with issues related to current account, other important issues. So our concern is if the government is committed to this rationalized convergence criteria being put forth to ensure that, we are prepared to, have this single currency, then of course that commitment can help bring down the fiscal deficit and then also ensure that the debt levels, come down to the levels that will ensure we can be part of this, single currency preparations that are being put in place. Yes.
Okay, so opening comments from Dr. Theresa Mana Blankson, Fellow Center for Social Justice for Finance and Economy. Let me come to Mr. Tekpe. Now, you've been quoted a lot since this announcement came up, but this week the one that caught my attention was the headline that said you advising the government to enter into this engagement with an open mind. What did you mean by that?
I think she just said it. If you look at the minister compliments, if you look at the statement...
just hold on a bit from Mr. Tekpe. I think we are struggling to hear you a bit, so they will deal with that. Dr. Swimming, sorry, then let me come to you before I go back to Mr. Tekpe on the engagement. For you, what will be the key points? Ghana side, IMF side?
Okay, so I think we sort of started on the back foot already, because there's been there should have been some form of national discussion about what our priorities will be. Mm-hmm. I think because there's a lot of time where, the powers that be have been denying some of the problems we have, mm-hmm. and denying the possibility that we are going to the IMF. It doesn't appear to me that there's been a lot of broad-based discussion of what policy priorities we should have if you do such an engagement. So the government shouldn't think that, it will just have an IMF program without broad-based public support and be very successful. Because
aren't we past that?
Well, they are discussing, but you've already seen what's happening on the labor front. So you can have a discussion, but if at the end of the day, labor is forcing your hand, mm-hmm. Then you might be forced to do things that will not really be consistent with whatever you've agreed with. I think the government should always understand that it is the people of Ghana that have elected them. Mm-hmm. And the people of Ghana, whatever they are doing, the people of Ghana's interest should be paramount. So for me, I think that already put us on the back foot. Mm-hmm. The fact that it appears the decision was made in a little bit of a hurry, and there's been not enough discussion, even especially with people in civil society organizations, and to think about what other alternatives. But that said, so if you put that said, in essence, I think everything is going to be on the table, like
Dr. Mana Blankson
has said. Everything is essentially going to be on the table, and I think
from the IMF side or from the Ghana side, because there are those who have said that the government of Ghana might not be willing to put everything on the table.
Well, I think it's what they want to do and what they should be doing, because we know how the president feels about some of the flagship programs. Mm-hmm. But we also know that part of the challenges we have come from some of the flagship programs that we have. Mm-hmm. So I don't think we should, if the government truly means to do a program that will give bring the economy out of the challenges we have, a lot of the things that the government feels strongly about to protect in terms of having no discussion, that we haven't had any discussion. It has been unwilling to countenance some discussions and some compromises. I think they have to come back on the table. But also, what will happen beyond the IMF? I think for me that's more important. we have to understand that the IMF, going to an IMF program, is not going to be the long-term solution to the economy of Ghana.
Certainly.
It appears that when you follow the communication, sometimes the information minister seems to make that kind of point. But there are some government communicators who feel that, when we listen to them, you get a sense that it's IMF and then all our problems are solved. The reason why we keep going back to the IMF because we have a structural issue with an economy. And the IMF program will not solve that problem. Maybe we will get, after the IMF program, if we follow it through religiously, we will get macroeconomic stability. That's only a means. It's a platform to build on. But if we have to have the discussions about what else we will do that will ensure that we are not returning to the IMF. Because sometimes I think there's been a lot of discussion, blowing a lot of hot air, and then making a lot of promises that we won't go back to the IMF, we won't go back to the IMF. But you could see that we are not doing anything that would suggest that we won't go back to the IMF. Okay. So for me, I think the medium to longer term measures that will ensure that we are restructuring our economy, especially on the productive side. Because we are going for balance of payment support. We have to ask ourselves where are our balance of payment challenges coming from. So we will deal with the fiscal side and the public finances side. But if you only solve that, if you only deal with that, ultimately, an economy that's not generating enough export revenue and it's importing so much and is so dependent on foreigners, we are always going to see a city going in only one direction. And our balance of payment problems will only return after maybe 2-3 years. I think at some point it will be almost every year. So that an IMF program might only work for us for a relatively shorter period than before. So I think that kind of discussion is as important as the details of what we are going to do with the IMF.
Okay. So back to Mr. Tekpe, on your advice, do this with an open mind.
Well, I think
where did that advice come from?
Well, I think the two speakers before me have made the same point. Because the problem facing us is not, a narrow tunnel where you just keep looking, but it's broad. So my sense came from first the Ministry of Information, or Communications information statement, as though all we needed was balance of payment support.
That's not all we need?
No, because as I try to explain, balance of payment support is BOG support. And BOG was giving government of Ghana, 1.7 billion, 10 billion. And the question is raised in the Article 4 as to whether BOG will continue financing government, given the constraints that we have. So that itself, the fiscal situation, is the source of a weak BOP support. So you couldn't just, an institution and a fund not give you BOP support. And all our fund programs, in principle, are BOP support. When we did the ECF and some earlier programs, in fact, the entire loan from the fund itself goes for BOP support, and it's the central bank that pays that. Your budget support comes from the World Bank, African Development Bank, development partners, and the rest. And in our case, one of the reasons we had to go and do an IMF program instead of pushing with the homegrown, policy, was because the EU in particular and World Bank withheld the budget support until, we went to Senchi, discuss, and without that there was no way, pragmatically speaking, because you had spent so much on single spine, you had, energy crisis and whatever. So if that was going to be withheld, there's no way which your own policy was going to hold. But I'll come to some of the structural, measures later. So that was the basis on which one was saying, and then you look at the problem in energy. Look at the problem in, I'm talking about the real sector now, education. Look at the problem in health, caused partly by capping, you take every sector, there's an issue. And compensation and interest is we say taking everything. We've known that. We've been discussing it for the last 2 years. I think it's been one of the topical issues. Now it's total revenue that's consumed. The IMF has another angle to it. Because when you take compensation and interest, then it means that you are borrowing to pay debt, but you don't want to default, right? Particularly the markets. So what they do is they take interest, and then they add the amortization, which is the principal repayment, because interest isn't. And it is 100, those two items are 129%. That's our last year, Article 4. 129% of our revenue. So it means that everything else is based on debt. So our budget is heavily leaning on debt. And therefore, if you say you are going to be focused on, BOP or debt as your introduction, which is what, the Prof was, talking about. Your debt is a derivative. It's derived from revenue less expenditure. Expenditure being high. Your deficit, you add arrears, right? And you get your fiscal balances. Arrears are questionable. The fund is questioning it. Later on, we could read a few things from the Article 4. I entreat you to your producers to look at it. They are questioning it, particularly energy sector. The provision is 0.4 in the budget. They have said that our arrears could be somewhere, which is not in the budget, somewhere around 2.6% of GDP, which means that we are seeing arrears of around, 3. But this is just regular arrears in the budget, and it is the fiscal balance of the deficit that you finance, that you borrow to finance, and then you repay, and that is what changes the debt stock, whether it goes up or down. And so you can't tackle debt. Agree with, debt management office. Yeah, it's in the PFMA. We had proposed that, Minister of Finance should set up a one cost to do it. A debt management, not a unit in the Ministry of Debt, and, similar to a department, like the Controller and Accountant General's Department, to look at our debt. Because one of the reasons is that we've become a middle income country. And that's the reason we are on the markets, because we are losing concessional financing and grants. And if we should strike a fourth oil field, maybe a fifth, given the prospects it's talking about, you will be moving somewhere closer to upper middle income countries, on the ladder. And so we needed to have that preparation. Structurally, that explains, our drive for sinking fund, our drive for stabilization fund, and all using the, Petroleum Revenue Management Act. But maybe we can come to that later. So if you look at the revelations, some of the things that are here, it's going to be a tough negotiation.
Which documents are you reading from, though? You keep making
it's Article 4.
Oh, okay.
And Article 4 was done. It used to be 2019. This was 2021. Exactly a year ago, July. It's just been, in the last few days, it's been, we stumbled on it because we've been tracking PFM Tax Africa, some of these things, and it's quite, informative.
Okay.
So let me just cite 2, and then I'll yield, and you continue your moderation. If you take total revenues, we have, they reproduce the, that was going into the 2022 budget. So revenue low, compared to actual. We said 17.5. That was what the authorities, that is the government, had agreed with the fund, 17.5. In the budget, we have 20%. So you can see, the fund is not convinced that we can do it. And I'm not convinced that we can do 20%. Because we were doing 16% total revenue. Tax to GDP ratio is 11.6%. Optimistically 12%. Sub-Saharan Africa, our peers who are middle income, are doing 17.5, 18%. So it tells you the difficulty that you have already with revenue mobilization.
But the government coins that particular problem as a citizen problem. Ghanaians don't like to pay tax. Ghanaians don't like to pay tax. You're a taxman, you're an accountant. Is that a fair accusation to make?
Well, that's why you have tax compliance. And that's why you have tax audit. But if you don't, if GRA hasn't got domestic tax system is sort of automated. We have started significant tax reforms. If you recall, right from day one, Professor Mills created GRA as an apex with authority. So instead of 3 commissioners having their own thing, all be on the board and 1 commissioner general, we merge IRS in a VAT because it's the same invoice that is needed to do the audits. Fast forward, we revamped all the tax laws. By the time 2013, all of them were brought because you can't have a VAT 1998 Act, Income Tax 2000 Act, Customs 1993. Even the substantive law was 85. With the regulations, we carved out excise completely. And along with this, you remember we're doing gift mix and all those things. Those are the structural, measures.
Okay.
Backed by stabilization fund, the buffer. You build it when the times are good, you fall on it when the times are bad. So COVID, we went to Parliament, 250 million. That was the first release for COVID. It was built up, from the Ms. Mahama era. 200 million to take on the first sovereign bond. It was sitting in the second fund, October 4th, 2017. But so enough of so if you run through this, your expenditure compared to 14% is 29.7.
Okay.
Right, twice. Already you have a problem. It means the deficit will be high. You come to a deficit, and this is where it's interesting. And this is the point we have been making, about showing things below the line. Whereas authorities are saying in the budget that the overall fiscal deficit will be 4.9. The funds adjustments and the agreement that was held was 11.4. See the gap, right? Then overall balance 6.5. The fund is saying is 15.2. And then when they include what they call arrears finance spending, that's it's euphemism for just saying you are not showing arrears, above the line. When they add that, the deficit as of July, which the fund was looking at, was 17.4. Much higher than the 15 or so percent we were discussing in some of your sessions. So we're looking, that's a projection. And we believe that this is the
more accurate.
Yes, problem that's facing us.
But because
remember Fitch and others,
yes,
we're at 15% there.
Yeah, but I want to stay on that before I move back to Dr. Mane and come back to Dr. Sumi. It looks like we've had these discrepancies in reporting. So you are looking at numbers here. The government has its numbers. Does that present a bit of a problem?
Well, there's always a difference with
there's a margin of error in there.
No, this
no, I'm just saying like a margin for differences between what the government reports and what the IMF.
The fund has always been conservative.
It's
so that one, even on a regular basis, they look at, it's more like it's an economic institution. When it comes to this, they behave like accountants.
So these things will not affect engagements because government says, well, these are our numbers. They say this is what we look at.
No, this is going to be the basis for the engagement. I'm giving you that the fund is not coming ignorant. Because the fund has held discussions with authorities, and it's quite elaborate.
Yeah, I know, but I'm just saying that for us as an audience here, you've already made the point that there are some of these lines, items that you've mentioned that what we get on the regular from the political side or from the government's reporting is not the same as this.
Oh yeah, but we're making it for ourselves. You remember bailout costs? Should we show it as a memo? We discussed those. Yeah. Do we have standards? For me, I always go to standards. What does the government finance statistics of the IMF say? What does IPSAS, which is the International Public Sector's Accounting Standards, what does it say? Right? Yeah, you can. And we have always isolated it. So that's why we have the exceptional expenditure. So you can go back, divestiture receipts, divestiture expenditure. They are added. If it's income, it benefits you. But here we take one item. We are leaving out financial sector bailout costs, which is being financed from ESLA. You are showing the revenue, but you are not showing the expenditure. You're showing the expenditure below the line. I mean, we've been debating this, among ourselves. But what we are saying is that the fund actually adjusted this in 2019. So these are the issues that will be on the, on the table. So you can see from what, Prof said, that it has to be everything. Because two examples quickly. It includes the bailout cost and includes energy. It includes wage, arrears, what is owed to NAPCO. They have information, so they gather all of this, right? So that tells you that it's not even just the fiscal structure that's going to be discussed. It's not just debt. It's not just domestic revenue mobilization. We're going to discuss real sector issues. Are you able to finance free SHS? Your last segment you were discussing it. Well, the point is
that's a big question. Do you think it will come up realistically? The government has. We interviewed the information minister just a bit here, and it was a question Bernard asked him.
Yes.
Free SHS, is that something? He says, well, the last time we dealt with the IMF, free SHS, was there, wasn't touched. So what makes you think it's going to be touched now?
Well, having we been discussing it, I think we should ask ourselves a question. As we were discussing, school feeding is in trouble. It's a key aspect of free SHS. 1 meal a day. We're in trouble. We are not able to, to pay for the past, let alone the present and the future, right? Teachers want more to be paid, more payment. But let's say that even the compensation includes, teachers, contractors, and all those things. They are all free SHS. Look at the issues, around it. Some head teachers are saying we are going to unilaterally do what? Ask the students to pay fees. Because it's just becoming too much. We are not able to disperse. Because, as I said, if you take it, from where we have been coming from, not the fund. If you take it from where we have been coming from, which is compensation and interest, then you can be assured that salary for teachers and allowances, you forget about the strike, assuming it's adequate, that is covered in compensation. Everything else, because those two items are taking the entire revenue. So everything else about free SHS is based on loan. And a good example, the parliamentary documents are there. 2019 or 2018 bond, 2.2 billion Ghana cedis of the bond we did went to finance free SHS. Now we are not able to go for the bond. So where are you going to get that money? And that's a question we should be asking ourselves. Yes, it shouldn't be the fund, It's just like single spine. Everybody realized the relevance of paying public servants well, if you remember. Yes. But it was heavy. We were borrowing. And what do we do? Whole forum, Takrady forum, culminating in Century forum. By the time we were going to the fund program, we had agreed on a program of payment. The first one was done by Dr. Dufour. The second one, was what led to the whole and because it wasn't going away. And we had to put in a program that will pay over a period of 3 years. So that was our proposal. Is it so? I think we should be asking ourselves before, we think that it is a fund, in position.
Okay. Let me go back to Dr. Mana Blyson. So, Doc, in listening to the points the three of you have made, it becomes a matter of, do we do a matter of political cost? I guess that should be the question. Do we do a matter of political cost versus economic cost at this moment for a government in entering such a program at this time?
Thank you for that question. And thank you so much to the other, panelists for their contribution. I was really listening with keen, listening to the numbers. Now, you raised the issue of whether we should weigh the political versus the economic cost. And I think one of the important points to note is that we cannot afford to deal with this issue for just short-term gains. And I think if you want to go the political cost, like dealing with, how you could get political backlash and therefore, you would want to just cover the wound but not treat it very well, then obviously it's going to have long-term economic implications that can actually affect our stability and, of course, cause us to go back to the fund. And so my sense is we need to really weigh these costs very well. Of course, for an incumbent government, they are obviously going to think of strategies to ensure that they can stay in power. But you want to really look at the long-term effect of whatever, decision you decide to go with. And that is really the point that I would, imagine that they would want to focus on and not just the short-term gains.
And in looking at some of the points Mr. Tekpe has highlighted, for instance, on the kind of information that an IMF comes to the table with, how does a government prepare in facing off in such an engagement?
Great point. And again, one of the things is there's going to be rationalization of the data. So I know Mr. Tekpe is very much aware of the process of this. When they come with different numbers, we have different numbers. There is a need for us to come to a consensus on what is really the numbers we are going to be using in even the negotiation that is going to take place. So my sense is, of course, how the IMF arrives at its numbers, they are going to really stand firm on that, unless government has, some information to push back, the fund and say, hey, this is what we believe is the data. But it's their word against the fund's word. My sense is, if the Fed and the fund is going to push on the numbers that they have, pretty much, it's going to be tough for the government to defend some of the things that, is in the public domain. Because again, even with our analysis, that is what we did. We used the data that is coming from the government. Some data, you look at both the IMF, World Bank data, there's so much inconsistency. And so it's a critical issue. You need credible information to be able to even implement policy changes. And without that, we are going nowhere with the discussion. So I think that is one that will be on the table to get a rationalize a consensus before they move on further.
Okay, Franklin, it's a question I must ask you because you are a bit of an expert on political cost and economic cost.
Well, I think the point being made is very valid. You recall in 2018, the point about declaring all data. Mm-hmm. Recall in 2018, the government was forced to write a humiliating apology for not reporting properly on the arrears issue, right? So this is a very important matter. Don't forget that even after the fund had agreed program, there may be times when they may not agree on everything. There have been fund programs in Ethiopia, for instance, for a $1.5 billion arrangement, which delayed significantly because there are variations here, and the government and the fund were not in agreement. Pakistan, almost $5 billion. They're still struggling. Even Zambia had issues with that. So the process itself leading to the agreement must be as thorough as the agreement that is reached as well. So, but my concern really is with what we say we'll do when we enter into a fund program afterwards, right? You recall the 2009 to 2011, the letter of intent contained certain important items that we wanted to undertake, like a hiring freeze within the public sector. These were things we committed to in a homegrown policy, for lack of a better term, domestic policy. Why it needed to take the fund for us to actually actualize that is something else that we need to discuss concerning the issues around governance and, if you like, sovereignty issues versus an imposition by a fund. In the same vein, we agreed as well to fix the Tema refinery, right?
We didn't do that.
Question is, has it been fixed? The review of the assets of the banks, which we committed to in the 2015 program, was something we had and Setekwa is here, Honorable Setekwa is here. I recall that these were things that the government has wanted to do from day one. My point is why it needed to take a fund program for us to agree that we will do some of these things. It's also sometimes confounding. Yeah, so the point I'm making is, yes, because the point I'm making is we already understand and know what we need to do, and we don't necessarily have to be waiting for the fund in order to get these things fixed. My problem with this conversation with the fund is essentially the fact that, look, at the end of the day, the technical expertise that you're likely to get or the guidance that you're likely to get cannot supplant what we as a country need to fix. As a government and as a people, we need to fix the issues about governance, the issues about transparency. Often when advocates like us talk about procurement issues, people tend to look at us as if we are from some other planet. But if you look at the level of procurement abuse that we've experienced in the last 5 years, culminating into the most of the financial irregularities that the Auditor General reports, has grown 13-fold from the last time we did the Fiscal Recklessness Index, that's Imani, between 2010 and 2014. MDA's fiscal irregularities totaled, I think, 1.9 billion Ghana cedis. That's between 2010 and 2014. And between 2016 and 2020, this has grown to almost 13 billion Ghana cedis. The question is, where have all these funds gone to? if you look closely, procurement irregularities are sitting there. Cash irregularities are sitting there. Tax irregularities are sitting there. I mean, if you did a combination of all the infractions, apart from the MDAs and the public sector, you're almost reaching almost 50 billion Ghana cedis. And how much are we going to look from the fund? Are we asking the fund? Well, what I've heard is
we don't know this time.
Well, I'm hearing almost 3 billion. I don't know whether what I read is true, but
do we even know what kind of program it is we are going in for? We don't know yet, do we?
Well,
it's too early.
It's a BOP, isn't it? But I think what Tekpa is saying essentially is that beyond the balance of payment support, you probably need to do a lot more. And so if you're asking for support within the short term, you need to restructure your debt. You need to ensure that you need to finance current needs, which means you need to really look at your debt sustainability profile. I think we wasted too much time. You recall
going back to the IMF, you mean?
Between May 2020 and I think December 2021, there was an opportunity through the debt sustainability initiative for us to have taken advantage of the 43 countries that went to that initiative.
Yes, that was in March.
Yeah, because the government thought that if we did that, because one of the preconditions to assessing that was a fund program. But the 3 countries took advantage, right? And they got almost, I think, $7-something billion. We were probably too pompous because we thought that, well, a fund program would have meant that we'd have failed. So the hubris has to be dealt with as well. I mean, the overconfidence with which we set most of the reform efforts that should have taken place within the last fund program, unfortunately has not borne fruit, right? So we still have issues regarding very poor spending, weak institutions, and of course debt as we have it right now. I think we need to clearly ask ourselves whether we can do without the fund. And my answer clearly is that yes, we could have, if we had fixed all these challenges that we are going to present to the fund as things we would like to do again. I mean, that's where the difficulty is. The fact that on your own you couldn't fix them, and now you think that if you had a superior entity guiding you, you probably would. But the history has shown that not all the things we say we'll do, we normally get to do.
Okay. So let me come to you, Dr. Asuming, and Franklin has done a great job of analyzing that, but I'm sticking with the political cost versus economic cost question for you, because free SHS, for instance, is a political cost that has had significant economic implications and might be one of the first items that gets discussed when this conversation happens, because like Mr. Tekwe has explained, it affects a lot of things when it comes to our money. So again, I want to hear your thoughts on just that breakdown for a government, for instance, because it always seems to be the political part that brings a government back to the IMF.
Yeah, so sometimes when I hear that distinction, I get a little confused and worried about what we do, because good economics should be good politics. Really, good economics should be good politics, except that sometimes there's a short-term trade-off.
Yes.
Where the good economics might look politically
inexpedient.
Exactly. So we seem to trade off on the political side, but because if we've made decisions that are unpopular in the short run, but in the long run, Ghanaians are happy. I mean, I can't think of any better political decision than that. But unfortunately, and if you look at the timing of this particular program, we are about 2 years away from election. So you know that whatever, some of the things that will be beneficial in the long term probably will be politically costly in 2 years. So, I mean, unfortunately, from where I sit, it seems like we've learned how to dribble the IMF.
Or ourselves.
Yes, we've been dribbling ourselves for a while. That's why we promise ourselves we are going to do A, B, and C, and we won't do it. But it appears that we've learned how to dribble the IMF in some way. Look, some of the things that has been spoken about consistently. The last time we were in the program, the issue about exemptions came up. And when we were exiting, we were promising that we were going to do the exemptions. Where are we today? We managed to get out of the program, and where are we today? We haven't done it. And there are also other, so there are some things that, you know, some of the issues that Franklin has raised, that we, you know, the IMF is like a headmaster, he has come. But until we learn to discipline ourselves when the headmaster is not in town, we are not going anywhere. The IMF is not going to solve the issue with governance and some issues of the governance maybe they can help us with. But, you know, when we overinflate contracts or there's so much corruption in different aspects of our society, the IMF will not necessarily help us fix that. And it feels that we've learned how to, you know, that's why I'm saying we have learned how to dribble even the IMF. There are some things that we will pretend that we are doing. So there are some of the issues you struggle to understand why, you know, we need so much revenue. And some of the relatively lower hanging ones, like property taxes and exemptions, why we haven't done them. So from where I sit, I expect that, you know, like the Dr. Mana Blanson said, it's going to be a difficult negotiation. And I can see the government trying to hold out for short-term political gains on some of the things that the president in particular will be very insistent. You know, when it comes to in particular, free SHS. We know, it's obvious that there are some people within the current government who are not all for it. Yeah. I mean, I think at least the finance minister himself has spoken about it. But it appears that when it comes to the crunch, the president will insist. At least when we hear the discussion, sometimes it looks like there's going to be a discussion and suddenly there's a major decision. We are not touching the... So I guess, you know, it's how much do we want to improve the economy over the long term versus, you know, how desperate are we to, you know, gain politically and then stay in power. And it appears that when, at the moment, in the short term, it appears that the politics will usually win the way.
I need to make a quick point. You know, I think I read somewhere from one of the government communications that we need to probably get into the program so that we can quickly go back to the market. If that is the thinking, I think we've lost the plot. Because you see, the challenges facing you are clearly the fact that you can't pay your debt. And your debt, your inability to pay debt or the debt you are contracting is linked to very poor spending programs, poor spending patterns for most of the programs. So the last thing you want to do with the fund is to just see them as ticking the box so that you can gain some confidence and go back to the market and go back to your old ways. I think that would be suicidal. At the least, what we need is a total rationalization review of all these pet projects, fanciful projects that have gone on for far too long. I just related to you, there have been so many projects that are billowing funds that we need to have a proper review. Okay. We may have been defeated through Kelny, but nobody has done an independent assessment of why the value Kelny has returned to the economy after paying $1.5 million monthly over the last number of years, right? Almost all these projects have to be rationalized. And at the last time that the government intended to do what we call the rationalization before the e-levy, we were thinking that everything was going to be on the table in terms of free SHS, one village, one dam. All these, quite frankly, nebulous projects were going to be on the table. Well, it wasn't. The question you're asking, Dr. Sumin, is whether only free SHS will be on the table. No, it shouldn't be just free SHS. But free SHS is probably preferable to the other ones, right? I mean, if you're asking me in terms of other priority, even free SHS needs to be reviewed. How much more the other ones that are just wasteful? Okay. We need to do that.
Let me go back to Mr. Tekpe on a couple of matters. On just even going forward, for instance, previous IMF programmers, Dr. Suming, Franklin have alluded to, we made certain promises that we were going to do these things. We were not able to do them. being able to go through this one requires a certain level of discipline. You've been in a situation where you have to weigh the political cost versus the economic cost as well. You maintain high levels of discipline that keeps a country away from the IMF, for instance, in our situation.
Every government faces when it comes to that. But let me it doesn't look like I'm just talking theory. Let me use specific examples. Okay. You spoke about the elections being 2 years away. 2014 was 2 years away. And we made a conscious decision. If you recall, His Excellency President Mahama said that we wanted a program to overlap the election year to prove that we can manage election expenditure. Our deficit was 6.1, only 1.1% above. It wasn't 8.3 if you take all the offsets and things that were done. 6.1. On a new basis, that's on a new basis. On a new basis, the debt was 57%. So we're really on a path of consolidation, despite all this. How did we, second, political decision. Recall that we were going to do 200 e-schools. FSHS is not new to politics. We are not just talking about it. We were going to do 200 e-schools. When we did a budget, 2015 budget, at the time we were reading the budget in 2014, that's when crude oil prices fell. We had done the budget with $99. Once we were reading the budget, crude oil prices, because of the BRIC, crisis and Saudi Arabia taking money out, is there also other reason why we did 10.2% in the markets? Because the markets, Saudi Arabia for the first time took money out of the emerging markets to go and manage its deficit. So if you remember, right in the middle of, and I'm talking about 2016 year, not 2014, President Mahama said we couldn't do 200. He said we could finish 150, and even that, when we get into 2017.
You even stopped some of the allowances, I recall.
Yes, we did. As a signal. So so he said we were going to do, maximum 150, and some of that would go into 2017, 2018, on the back of 10 field and Sankofa, when we expected a rebound, and others. The other major and toughest one, 2015, was ESLA. ESLA was not an IMF imposition. You won't see it, there. You won't see it in the program. We did ESLA on our own. Because otherwise, the real sector of the economy was going to crash. Because VRA balance sheet was completely impaired. We were not paying IPPs and the rest. Right? So those were, tough political decisions I had because we wanted to save the program. And we continued with our homegrown policy. We included it, so we continued. Remember, we were putting, even when the crude oil prices fell, because 2017 had we won, we were going to cough 750 million to take off the first sovereign bond, which was near to impossible. We started building up a second fund for 2014. Did we have need? We could probably have said, let's use that to build the schools. In fact, the fund at a point during the discussion said, okay, why don't you even take some of the money to reduce the deficit? But the deficit is consumption, it's spent already. We have to look, ahead, right, and all that. So I'm only saying that we have to begin to master political control. And it's not just, here. Remember 2 instances in the US. President Trump was going to build a wall. He had to convince the Congressional Budget Office and others where he was going to get the money. And then he took some money from the military to do something in Texas. They couldn't do, the big wall that they wanted around Mexico and everything. It was impossible. President Biden, remember his infrastructure? It's in the town. Nobody doubts. The US is heavy on infrastructure. Their highways will be there, them, bridges and all those good, some of them from Delaware to the Golden Gate Bridge and all that. They are tourist even attractions and the way they are designed. He's still there, he hasn't been able to do it on account of a political promise, which is facing the reality. So I'm only giving these kind of examples to show that oftentimes, it came to the crunch.
But discipline is possible.
Fiscal discipline is possible. That's why I'm giving these examples to show that fiscal discipline, of course, you won't get total consensus. For example, as the Doc said, you may have, like when the minister was roasted, when he said, why should government pay the fees for my nieces? Presumably his children were already out of school, and nephews. But if we want to move forward as a state, then these are some of the things that we should learn to build our buffers. You remember free SHS. If you look at free SHS, as I said, we should ask ourselves, besides the question that I posed earlier on, let's go back to some of the debates in free SHS. Capping. The majority of the capping that was there for get fund, and all that, and even the daching and other things, they went to finance those, those types of expenditures. No question about it. Right. Remember we went through the debate. Should we even sweep the Heritage Fund to support free SHS? It was a huge debate, almost for 3 months, 4 months. Civil society, some of us, and we said, and look at what is happening today. Look at the debt profile. That future generation, the 40-year bond, which we are paying just interest, is the one that's going to, to pay. And yet you want to take the savings that you are making so they can use it to manage that debt. You see the sort of dilemma that we face ourselves. Then I mentioned the bond. All this wasn't enough. At a point, if you remember, Piak, said that the proportion, even though education was prioritized, the proportion of funds that were taken from the ABFE for education, was breaching the PRMA. So we've been having the free SHS debate. I think that even if you talk about free SHS on our side, the difference is the unfettered nature of free SHS. When I say unfettered, everything being paid for. Right. And taking a strategic view. Those of us who have lived outside, those who are outside, now listening to us, will confirm. All secondary schools, public, are day schools. Go to the US, go to the UK. Of course, you can take your child to eating, boarding, and whatever. You have to pay for it. Right. The school is taken to the community. To the extent that even the property tax you pay in places like Virginia determines the quality of school, because that's where some properties are very expensive, Fairfax and other places. But of course, the states and the other governments come in to support, with free meals and other things. So these are advanced countries, European and other countries, who have taken, secondary education in a measured way, because even they know that it will be very heavy, to make every, day school. But what do? They complement it with buses, with other things, So I just want to say that if we really want and say we're fed up, with the fund, then we should go back, and I think as a nation, we started on something which we shouldn't dismantle, the petroleum funds. As I said, the portion that went into the stabilization fund. If with 2 oil fields we had probably accumulated 500, we may probably would have gone to the bank fund for 200 or 300, not $1 billion to support COVID. Let me just mention, 2 things. Some of the things we are talking about, it's already on the card. The budget also envisages medium-term consolidation for a return to a primary surplus. The medium-term plan includes no new revenue measures, which is unfortunate. It has to, because automation of the domestic, we did ICOMS, you remember single window?
Yes.
West Blue, which is now substituted by ICOMS. So that's the customs end. The phase 2 was domestic revenue, automation of IRS and VAT, the measure, and you interface it with customs. I understand that there's some tender that's going on, so this may not be. It's delayed. It was to have followed almost immediately. So to say that there will be no revenue, even when we're talking about medium term, no, it's not possible. That means that, as I spoke about the gap already, to bring the government balances into surplus, resting solely on spending cuts, revenue, spending cuts. These measures assume nominal salary reduction against the background of what is happening. This was in the document. It's impossible. No growth in the civil service workforce. Remember we were said? Here it's surfacing again. Because you can't use the civil and public service alone to create jobs. House solution, build infrastructure. How many jobs? Maybe we made a mistake of not. We were saying it, you know. How many jobs have been created by Terminal 3? How many jobs have been created by Tema Port expansion? How many jobs have been created for nurses and doctors, you know, by the hospitals, district hospitals and the rest that were new, and the rehabilitation? How many jobs, you know, even in the education sector for the e-schools? These are significant jobs that are being created. So there's nothing that says that we should put every job creation on the civil service and the public service. We have our rains, which is the equivalent of snow, those of us who travel. After snow, they resurface, they do the resurfacing. They seal it, salt. The salt that damages the roads, it creates jobs. We know it. If you have a house in the US, anywhere, next to you, you have, that's where these big pickups, you know, are useful. The back is for, we do it here. So why don't we resurface, a program of resurfacing, which is why we put some money aside, you know, at our time to be doing the cocoa roads, re-graveling and all those things. And those trucks which we are using on the roads will find a use because they can carry, you know, gravel, you know, for a stretch of a village road of 2 miles. You know, up and down because they're strong. And that's the uses there. These are sort of uses for salt, you know, for bitumen and others. So I'm saying that the issues are already there. Okay. And we seem to be just repeating. So why don't we have a program, you know, for some of these things?
Right. Fair point there made by Mr. Setekwe. I'll take a quick break and then take closing comments when we return. Welcome back to the big issue, and I'll be going through some of your messages before we wrap up. 0549 986 996, 0550 585832, 0549 986 996, and 0550 585832, discussing engagements with the IMF, some of the things that we can expect in the engagements, and my guests for this segment have been breaking it down, but also trying to look forward a bit to how we might not get here in the short term, because sometimes you listen to Dr. Asumi says if you don't take care, the period might even get shorter if we do not do things properly. So I guess my final question would be to Dr. Theresa Mana Blankson, and then I'll use the same question to wrap up the program. Just 2 quick things. How we do not end back here. What do we do? Dr. Mana Blankson.
Can you repeat the question again?
Yes, I'm saying if you had 2 free tips to give on how we do not get to this point again, or prolong our attachment to the IMF, although we know exactly why they exist, but create a situation where we do not have to go back as regularly as we have done these past few years, what would be the 2 points you make?
Excellent. Thank you so much. I guess 2 things that come to mind immediately is, of course, restructuring the economy. Currently, the nature in which our economy is structured, you know, we are dependent mostly on, you know, primary commodities and the like. I think it's important that if we really want to, you know, develop our agri sector and then, of course, our manufacturing sectors to ensure that, you know, the country is on a path towards sustainable growth and development, then a number of things would include the restructuring of the economy. Also, I think there is a need for rules. I believe that when we have a rules-based system, that ensures that government is accountable, government, is transparent in terms of what they do with, you know, the resources that we have. These are things that can create checks and balances along the way. If there is no commitment to specific rules, and, you know, we as a people holding our leaders accountable, then, of course, you know, we are likely to end up going back to the fund when these problems occur. If an economy is being managed well, then we are using our resources effectively and efficiently in a way that we can actually repay debt. Loans are needed. We need debt, you know, to grow. But the question is, what level is sustainable for the economy? And that is really where we need to be. And so, again, implementing a number of changes in the economy, including the restructuring, commitment to specific rules, transparency, accountability, improving upon governance, these are all important tenets that will prevent us going back.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Amana Blankson. Dr. Sumin.
Okay. Well, I definitely agree with her on the restructuring of the economy, and then also on the accountability bit. I think on their own, no government will give us accountability. Maybe it's time for Ghanaians to be more demanding, and then extract the accountability from our government, because we can go to the IMF, we can do all the things that we are doing, but if public sector funds are not being properly accounted for, or there's a lot of siphoning, or we are not getting value for what we are spending, then we will work, we will collect all the taxes, and then still not much will improve, because if we are collecting the taxes, we are doing the revenue measures, and the funds are being siphoned away. We are not going to even improving tax collection will not be the solution for us. So I think Ghanaians should be more demanding of our government, especially on the accountability front.
Satekwe?
Well, my tool will be to strengthen institutions. We mentioned Debt Management Office, in passing, in GRA, all the sectors of the institutions, AESL, for example, to be able to look at projects and things, the area where, Franklin has been talking about. We have institutions that are charged, from the Auditor General to the Internal Audit Agency and all those things. So we need to strengthen our institutions. I think that was the advice President Obama gave us. If you remember when he came here, he said we need leadership. Africa needs leadership, but also needs institutions. And I think that's very important. The other is for us in terms of the discussion to be very open, because the fund has been complaining already, about lack of transparency on the energy sector. The last reconciliations at 2021 was in 2018. That's the latest information. They complain about transparency in COVID. It's not just our parliament. So I think if we want to make progress, it may be bitter, coming up with the things that are, but we need to be very, open, with Ghanaians, so that we know, the depth of the problem. And that's the only way in which it's not just a fund that's going to resolve the issues for us. We may have DPs and others, but we ourselves. And I'm saying this also for another reason. 2020, we had the COVID loan to cover us up, Bank of Ghana to cover up, World Bank, others, nearly 6 billion flowed into the economy. We still have a hole. This year, if you see the financing line, much of it is on the SDR that we got. These are one-time interjections into the economy. We are not going to be having these largesse, And so if we are mindful of going back, our ratings and other things, then we must ourselves move the budget away from this, one time, and including bonds that go into consumption, and they must go into things that we can see, including our oil revenue. So those will be my two important points.
We certainly cannot be scapegoating the IMF for our economic failures. I mean, homegrown economic failures. I think it's about time we fix weak spending choices. We need to fix weak governance institutions, and also fix our low revenue targeting or revenue mobilization efforts as well. I mean, the battle at the end of the day is on the home front. I don't think the IMF will come. The IMF will come and go, but we should definitely be at the commanding heights of our own economy.
Thank you very much, Franklin Cudjoe. And then we'll wrap up today's episode of The Big Issue. My name is Godfrey. Thank you as well to Dr. Theresa Amana Blankson, who woke up early to spend time with us. She's a fellow with the Center for Social Justice, for Finance and Economy, and also Dr. Patrick Assuming from the University of Ghana. I promise the next time I walk past your office, I will knock. Have a good weekend.